Hooked change is rarely the enemy. What unsettles you is the quiet death that comes before it. The fading of a familiar self, the version of you that once knew how to belong in a certain life. We say we fear the unknown, but most of what we resist is the grief of outgrowing our old reflection. The habits that once defined you, the emotions you trusted, even the pain that shaped your identity, all begin to dissolve when transformation arrives. And somewhere between who you were and who you are becoming, a silence appears. That silence isn't emptiness. It's a doorway, an invitation to witness the birth of a new self. But to walk through it, you must first say goodbye to the person you've always been. Chapter 1. The familiar weight of the old self change is often described as a beginning. But before something begins, something must quietly end. And most people are not afraid of the beginning. They're afraid of that ending. The end of a self that has carried them for years. There's a strange comfort in the known, even when the known hurts. The mind builds a home out of repetition. The same thoughts, the same emotions, the same reactions. It may be painful, but it's familiar, and familiarity has its own kind of safety. You know how to be this person. You've practiced it for years. You know how they speak, how they cope, how they hurt, how they survive. Even their pain has a rhythm. That rhythm becomes identity. And when change appears, when life, growth, or loss begins to rewrite your rhythm, it doesn't just threaten your circumstances, it threatens your very sense of existence. You feel as if you're dissolving, as if the ground beneath your feet is no longer yours. Because in many ways, it isn't. The ground was built from your memories, your habits, your emotional scars. Everything that once made you feel real. This is why even healing feels frightening. When you start to let go of who you were, you're not just leaving behind pain, you're leaving behind familiarity. The mind whispers, "If I am not this, then who am I?" And the silence that follows that question feels unbearable. The truth is, we all live with quiet attachments to outdated versions of ourselves. The person who learned to keep the peace. The one who worked tirelessly for approval. The one who stayed small to avoid rejection. These versions of you were never mistakes. They were survival strategies, written by the child you once were. But now, they have become heavy. You wear them like old clothing that no longer fits, yet you keep them on because you remember how naked it felt not to have them. People often confuse identity with safety, but identity is just memory. Memory that repeats itself until it feels like truth. The story you tell about who you are is just the echo of experiences you've lived through, not the limits of who you can become. Still, letting that story change feels like betrayal. You grieve the old self even when it kept you trapped. You miss the pain that once gave you purpose. You long for a version of yourself who didn't yet know what was coming. So you resist. You postpone growth under the disguise of timing. You tell yourself you're not ready. But what you're really saying is, I'm not ready to lose the person I've always been. And maybe that's okay, because loss, even the loss of a self, must be honored before it can be released. You cannot rush identity death any more than you can rush grief. The old self deserves a moment of silence, a moment of gratitude. It tried, it carried you. It loved the best it could with what it knew. But there comes a point when keeping it alive costs you more than letting it go. The habits that once protected you begin to suffocate you. The stories that once gave you meaning start to sound like someone else's voice. You start to feel like an actor in your own life, reciting lines that no longer belong to your heart. And that is when you begin to feel the weight. Not of the future, but of the past. The weight of the old self clinging to the edges of your becoming. Change, at its core, is not about moving forward. It's about finally being willing to set down that weight, and to stand, for the first time, as no one you've ever been before. Thynksee, Chapter 2, The Origins of Identity Attachment. No one is born knowing who they are. Identity is not an inheritance, it's an imitation that slowly becomes a belief. As children, we watch. We observe what earns affection, what provokes silence, what makes others turn away. We study the invisible rules of love, and without knowing it, we build ourselves around them. A child doesn't ask, "Who am I?" They ask, "Who do I need to be safe?" And whatever answer the world gives becomes the seed of identity. If crying brings comfort, they learn that vulnerability is connection. If crying brings shame, they learn that silence is survival. If achievement brings love, they learn that worth must be earned. If stillness brings rejection, they learn that motion is protection. Piece by piece, the child constructs a self that can coexist with the world. Not necessarily a true self, but a tolerated one. This construction becomes the foundation of the adult psyche. By the time we grow, we have already rehearsed ourselves thousands of times. The tone of our voice, the way we apologize, the fears that follow us into relationships, they all carry the fingerprints of early belonging. The human brain is wired to seek patterns that keep it safe. Once it discovers what works, it repeats. That repetition becomes character. That character becomes identity. And identity becomes the lens through which we interpret everything. So when change threatens that structure, even if the change promises peace, the mind experiences it as danger. Because to change the pattern is to risk safety. To question identity is to question survival. You can see this in the subtle ways people hold on to their pain. The one who always plays the caretaker cannot imagine being cared for. The one who hides behind humor cannot stand silence. The one who thrives in control feels lost in surrender. Each pattern began as protection, yet now functions as a prison. Psychology calls this identity attachment, the emotional glue that binds us to who we think we are. It is not just cognitive, it is embodied. It lives in muscle tension, breathing rhythm, posture, even tone. The body remembers who it had to be to stay loved. When you try to change, you are not just changing habits. You are threatening the body's oldest agreement. If I stop being this person, I might not be loved anymore. And so, even as the adult mind says, I want to heal, the emotional body whispers, but will I still belong? This is why progress can feel like betrayal. Why self-growth often brings guilt before peace. You are not just evolving, you are defying the rules of your original belonging. But somewhere deep within, there is also another memory. One older than fear, one softer than the need to please. It is the memory of existing before identity. Before you were a role, you were awareness. Before you were someone's child, someone's friend, someone's label. You were simply here. That awareness is still there, waiting beneath the noise of conditioning. It doesn't need to prove or perform. It only observes. And each time you touch it, in moments of stillness, in moments of truth, you remember that identity was never the entirety of you. It was only the clothing you wore to survive the weather of your upbringing. When you begin to understand that, the fear of change starts to soften. Because you realize that what you are losing is not yourself. It's the version of you that was built to be accepted. True change begins not when you create a new self, but when you finally understand why you created the old one. Perfect. Here's Chapter 30, The Psychology of Transformation, the 640 words, written in the same meditative, cinematic, and psychologically grounded tone. Thynksee, Chapter 30. The Psychology of Transformation. Transformation sounds beautiful. But to the human psyche, it is chaos. It asks the mind to dismantle the very system it built to protect itself. It asks the body to let go of familiar tension. And it asks the soul to release an identity that once felt like home. To understand why change feels so unsettling, you must see how the mind works. The human brain is designed for stability, not evolution. It clings to what it knows because familiarity equals safety. Every thought, every behavior, every emotional habit becomes part of a delicate psychological ecosystem that maintains balance. Psychologists call this homeostasis, the mind's way of keeping the self consistent, even when that consistency hurts. When something new enters your life, a relationship, a loss, an awakening, your system feels it as a disruption. It doesn't matter whether the change is good or bad. It still triggers resistance because it threatens equilibrium. Cognitive dissonance emerges, two truths trying to coexist. I want to grow, but also, I don't want to lose who I am. That friction is transformation in motion. At first, it feels like confusion. You question your decisions, your direction, your worth. Old thoughts resurface, trying to pull you back into alignment with the old self. The mind floods you with familiar emotions because it believes discomfort means danger. And so it reaches for what once felt safe: old habits, old beliefs, old pain. But transformation isn't just a mental event, it's biological. The brain's neural pathways, the routes your thoughts travel every day, begin to shift when you adopt new perspectives. That shift requires energy, focus, and emotional discomfort. In neuroscience, this is known as neural plasticity, the ability of the brain to rewire itself in response to new experiences. Every moment of growth literally rewrites your internal landscape. The problem is that the old patterns don't vanish quietly. They resist extinction because they are efficient. The brain prefers the known path. It costs less energy, feels predictable, and ensures survival. This is why transformation often feels like a battle between two selves, one who seeks freedom and one who seeks familiarity. The ego, too, resists change. Its job is to maintain identity, to preserve the story of me. Even when that story is painful, it provides coherence. Without it, the ego feels naked, unanchored, undefined. So when you begin to change, the ego interprets it as death. That's why it fights back with self-doubt, overthinking, or nostalgia. It's not trying to harm you, it's trying to survive. The psychology of transformation is not about forcing change, but about recognizing this resistance as part of the process. Fear, confusion, and emotional fatigue are not signs of failure. They are evidence that your inner world is being rearranged. Imagine a forest after a wildfire. It looks destroyed, but beneath the ash, seeds are opening that could not have opened before. The fire did not end the forest, it transformed it. In the same way, inner change burns away what no longer serves your growth. It feels like loss, but it is life reshaping itself. Transformation requires patience because the psyche moves slowly. It needs time to reorient, to trust the new rhythm. You cannot rush it with affirmations or discipline. You can only stay present as the old self dissolves, and trust that something wiser is taking form beneath the surface. When you understand this psychology, that resistance is not a wall, but a wave. You stop fighting the fear of change. You begin to see that what you call fear is only your system adjusting to a new kind of freedom. Harfei Chapter 40, the inner conflict between safety and growth. Inside every person, there are two opposing forces quietly negotiating with each other. The part that longs for safety and the part that longs to grow. Safety whispers, stay where it's familiar, bow. A growth whispers, there's more than this. And between those two voices, the human heart hesitates, torn between the comfort of what it knows and the ache of what it could become. This is not weakness. It is the most natural tension in the human psyche. Your nervous system was built for survival, not expansion. Its first priority is to protect you from harm, not to help you evolve. That's why the moment you step beyond the familiar, emotionally, relationally, spiritually, your body interprets it as risk. Even if the change is good, your mind feels unsafe. Safety doesn't always mean peace. Often, it's just predictability. Pain that you already understand feels safer than joy you've never met. You know how to handle disappointment. You don't yet know how to trust ease. You know how to live with anxiety. You don't yet know how to live without it. So, the mind returns to what it knows, because knowing feels like control. This conflict becomes the silent battlefield of inner life. Part of you wants to evolve, to heal, to expand beyond the patterns that limit you. And another part clings to the rhythm of old wounds, because they make sense. They provide identity, explanation, belonging. The pain has become proof that you are still yourself. Psychologists often describe this as self-sabotage, but it's more compassionate to call it self-protection. You are not destroying your growth. You are trying to keep yourself safe in the only way you've ever known. The mind confuses safety with sameness. It believes that change equals chaos, even when the current life is quietly suffocating you. This inner conflict can manifest in subtle ways: procrastination, indecision, overthinking, or emotional withdrawal. Every hesitation hides the same question. If I let go of this, will I still be me? Growth demands uncertainty, and uncertainty feels like falling. The ego wants a promise that you will land safely before you leap. But life never gives guarantees, only invitations. The leap must come first, the wings appear afterward. This is where many people retreat, not because they don't want transformation, but because they cannot bear the disorientation that comes with it. It's not easy to unlearn protection. It's not easy to trust that peace will not destroy you. To outgrow your safety patterns is to walk unarmed into a world your nervous system doesn't yet understand. But what's remarkable is how adaptable the human psyche truly is. When you take even one step beyond fear, the system begins to recalibrate. Your body learns that discomfort isn't always danger. Your mind learns that change doesn't mean death, it can mean rebirth. And slowly, safety and growth stop competing. They begin to cooperate. Safety becomes the ground, growth becomes the sky. You need both. Growth without safety is chaos. Safety without growth is stagnation. The balance lies in learning to feel secure enough to evolve, to build an inner stability that welcomes change rather than resists it. The truth is, you don't overcome fear. You walk with it until it learns your rhythm. You teach your nervous system that the unknown is survivable, that you can be both scared and ready, both uncertain and moving. Every time you do that, the conflict softens. The voice of safety no longer argues with the voice of growth. It begins to guide it, reminding you that evolution is not the opposite of safety. It's the highest form of it. Poetic, Chapter 50. The moment of surrender. There comes a point in every transformation when effort stops working. You've read, reflected, resisted, reasoned. Yet still, the old self lingers like smoke that won't clear. You try to push through it, to become better, but the harder you push, the heavier it feels. Because transformation cannot be forced. It asks not for control, but for surrender. Surrender is misunderstood. It isn't giving up, it's giving way. It's the quiet moment when resistance breaks, not from defeat, but from understanding. When the heart finally whispers, I don't need to win against this. I just need to see it for what it is. In psychology, this moment mirrors what Carl Jung called individuation, the process of becoming whole by integrating the parts of yourself you once rejected. It's not about replacing the old self with a new one, it's about holding both. The one who suffered, and the one who's ready to live. And realizing they were never separate to begin with. Before surrender, you're caught in a tug-of-war with your own shadow. You cling to what's leaving, terrified of the emptiness that might follow. But surrender doesn't demand that you erase who you were. It simply asks you to stop fighting the truth that you have outgrown that version of yourself. The moment of surrender rarely arrives with drama. It comes quietly, in a deep breath. A breakdown, a moment of stillness you didn't plan. You might be walking home, washing dishes, or sitting in the dark, and suddenly, something inside you lets go. The tightness in your chest releases. The noise in your mind softens. You feel the smallest flicker of peace, not joy, not triumph, but peace. And in that silence, you realize the struggle was never against life. It was against your refusal to let life change you. Every transformation has a death inside it, a death of certainty, a death of self-image, a death of the illusion that you were ever in control. And yet, this death is sacred, because only by letting the old identity die can something more honest be born. It's natural to grieve this moment, to feel sadness for the person you once were, the one who tried, who hoped, who did the best they could with the tools they had. That grief is not regression, it's reverence. You are honoring the self that carried you here, even as you release them. True surrender feels like floating in dark water. There's fear at first. Your instinct is to fight, to swim, to reach for something solid. But eventually, exhaustion teaches you to trust the water. And the moment you stop struggling, you realize it's been holding you all along. That's surrender. Not escape. Not avoidance. Trust. You begin to see that growth doesn't come from effort alone. It comes from alignment, from letting the current of your own becoming move through you instead of against you. Life was never asking you to control the tide, only to stop pretending you are separate from it. When surrender happens, everything changes quietly. The world looks the same, but it no longer feels like a battlefield. You no longer need to defend your old identity or prove your new one. You begin to inhabit the present moment, not as an idea, but as a truth, and from that space, tender, uncertain, and strangely calm, you begin to understand what Jung meant, that the true transformation of the self begins only after resistance ends. What remains is not emptiness, but freedom. The freedom to finally become who you were always meant to be, once the fight to remain who you were has ended. Thynksee, Chapter 60. Becoming someone new. After surrender comes stillness. A quiet unlike anything you've known before. It isn't the silence of emptiness, it's the silence of beginning again. You've let the old self fall away, and what remains is space. At first, that space feels strange, almost hollow. But if you stay long enough, you realize it's not emptiness, it's possibility. Becoming someone new doesn't happen all at once. It's not a grand unveiling or a single decisive moment. It's subtle, a shift in tone, a softer response. A thought that used to hurt but now passes through you without echo. You begin to notice how different you feel in familiar places. How certain people no longer pull at the same wounds. How silence, once unbearable, now feels like rest. This is the quiet evidence of rebirth. No applause, no certainty, just awareness. You start to live less from fear and more from presence. You stop performing the version of yourself that once kept you safe. You stop chasing validation for wounds that no longer define you. You begin to speak from a place that doesn't need to prove anything. Psychologically, this stage is called affect integration. It's when the conscious and unconscious parts of you begin to cooperate rather than compete. The mind no longer wages war against the heart. You start to embody alignment, where your thoughts, emotions, and actions begin to move in the same direction. But integration is not perfection. You still stumble. You still doubt. You still feel the pull of your old patterns. The difference is, you no longer mistake them for truth. You can see them rise and fall, like waves that no longer drown you. You no longer panic when fear returns. You understand it's only visiting. Becoming someone new isn't about adding layers. It's about remembering what was always underneath. The self that existed before fear dressed you in its armor. The self that once trusted easily, dreamed freely, felt deeply. That self was never lost, only buried beneath years of adaptation. And now, in this new space of awareness, it begins to breathe again. You may find that your relationships shift, sometimes painfully. Not because others have changed, but because your energy no longer matches the old agreements. You no longer play the same roles. The fixer, the pleaser, the savior, the silent one. And when those roles dissolve, so do the dynamics built around them. It can feel lonely at first, this distance from the familiar. But loneliness is not emptiness. It's the clearing before connection returns in a truer form. There's something quietly miraculous about realizing you no longer crave the chaos you once called love. That you no longer chase what hurts or numb what heals. That you can sit with uncertainty and not need it to end. This is the mark of becoming new, not in what you gain, but in what no longer controls you. You begin to live with gentleness, not out of fear, but out of understanding. You stop trying to fix yourself because you finally see you were never broken. Only becoming. Growth, you realize, isn't about changing who you are. It's about remembering who you've always been beneath the survival. And one day, you wake up and realize you no longer recognize the person who once begged life not to change. You have become someone who can meet change with open hands, not clenched fists. Someone who can say, I don't know who I'm becoming, but I trust the becoming itself. That is transformation, not an ending, but a homecoming. A return to a self that no longer fears its own evolution. Quafe Chapter 70, the quiet after becoming. When transformation settles, the world doesn't suddenly change, but your way of seeing it does. The noise of becoming fades, and what remains is a quiet that feels almost foreign. There's no dramatic arrival, no chorus announcing who you are now, just a stillness that hums beneath everything, like the ocean after a storm. At first, this quiet feels unfamiliar. You search for the tension that used to define you, the constant hum of self-improvement, the chase for meaning, the need to prove. But it isn't there anymore. You are standing in a kind of peace that doesn't announce itself. It's simply as is. This is what healing often looks like. Not euphoria, not endless light, but the soft, steady rhythm of being at ease within your own skin. You are not trying to be someone. You simply are. The world around you still moves fast. People still rush, still cling, still fear. You see yourself in them, the way you once held on to pain like it was purpose. But instead of judgment, you feel compassion. Because you understand now that everyone is just trying to keep themselves intact in a world that demands change. In this quiet, you realize that peace is not the absence of pain. It's the absence of resistance. Pain will still visit. Loss will still arrive. But you no longer mistake their presence for your identity. You let them move through you like weather through sky, shifting, passing, always leaving behind clearer air. The person you've become doesn't chase certainty anymore. They understand that life is not something to master, but something to meet. Each moment becomes a mirror, each ending a teacher, each beginning a reminder that nothing was ever meant to stay still. Psychologically, this stage is the full circle of transformation, integration and transcendence. The self no longer divides experiences into good or bad, success or failure. It simply observes them as movements of the same dance. The old patterns may whisper from time to time, but they no longer hold authority. You know now that identity is fluid, a living, breathing conversation between your past and your potential. In this awareness, even your story changes tone. You no longer tell it as tragedy or triumph, just truth. You can speak of pain without collapsing into it, remember love without idealizing it, and see your scars not as symbols of damage, but of depth. It's in this quiet that you start to notice beauty again. The texture of light on walls, the sound of your own breath, the way your reflection no longer feels like a stranger. Life becomes less about achievement and more about participation, a steady unfolding rather than a race to a destination. You begin to understand what Jung meant when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Yes, now you can see the unconscious for what it is, a dream you no longer have to sleep through. You can live awake. The quiet after becoming is not a permanent state. It too will change, because transformation is not a single event, it's the rhythm of existence itself. You will outgrow this self one day too, and when that time comes, you'll know how to let go. Not with fear, but with gratitude. Because now you understand, every ending was never loss, but preparation for the next truth to be lived. And so, the story closes where it began, not in the fear of change, but in reverence for it. You no longer resist the unknown. You bow to it, knowing it's where all new selves are born. The quiet after becoming isn't the end of the journey. It's simply the pause between heartbeats, the space where life gathers breath before it begins again.